So as a true European citizen, I would like you to welcome Mr. Pangratis, Ambassador, here tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction and for the invitation. Very pleased to be with you, ladies and gentlemen. I have a very demanding theme to talk to you about, and I have a lot to tell you. I'll try to be disciplined because I know Michael wants his session and his questions afterwards. So I'll try to be brief and give you, you know, the main elements. What should we think? In my opinion, when we talk about innovation, the EU, and then of course the EU. US. I will talk a little bit more about EU and then, of course, about the EU-US in 5 points. First, innovation in the current crisis. Where does the concept fit? Second, the importance of innovation really for the growth strategy, the Europe 2020, from an EU point of view, but the basic concepts, I think, are valid for everybody, the US and everybody else, in fact. Third, the existing instruments, very briefly, but important to mention them, of promoting innovation in the EU and the orientation that we are taking towards the future. Fourth, the importance of open trade, again, briefly, but it's an important element of innovation and the link between innovation and the growth. And fifth, the EU, last but not least, the EU-US innovation partnership, the orientations that we are taking. So, starting probably with the most global concepts, the importance of innovation in the current economic context. Again, taking Europe as a starting point, Europe faces, we know, major challenges requiring structural adjustments. Not only Europe, but I'm just talking about Europe mainly. Requires structural adjustments to a world that is really changing profoundly in terms of the need for everybody to adapt to globalization, the need to adapt to the climate change and to move towards the green economy of the future. And in our countries, in the developed world, in the West, the aging population. These are fundamental challenges that require a lot of adapting. A lot of this adapting has to come from an increased ability to innovate. Then in these challenges that existed in any case, and they are formidable for all of us, came the banking, financial, and then economic crisis that we now are in. Now this economic crisis had many results, very unpleasant for millions of people. But in the global macroeconomic, global policy-making level, the crisis, particularly the banking part of it, provoked a reaction in terms of public policy-making, which is unprecedented in modern history, which was in fact able, through the stress of the importance of the possible negative consequences, it was a sufficient reason to bring together the main players in the context of the G20 mainly. But in fact, the main players around the world, probably all the countries, we can say all the countries that really have a significant global impact, to bring them together in a kind of coordinated reaction, which was basically supporting the banking sector, but also a reaction of stimulus to avoid the consequences on growth. This stimulus, making a long story short, because you all know it, this stimulus created a fiscal challenge very quickly, aggravated fiscal imbalances that existed before that, and now we are in a situation where we have to plan a very delicate approach. We have to strike the right balance between contradictory needs. On the one hand, support the growth and on the other hand, stop the stimulus that in fact is aggravating the fiscal imbalances. So we have to exit the stimulus for fiscal sustainability reasons, and at the same time make sure that we sustain growth. And then the whole question, the key question that brings us to the innovation of the current challenge, which I repeat is for the EU, but it's the global challenge of the developed world, is exit to where? Where do we want to go? Exit to growth, certainly, but as I said, exit to sustainable growth, exit to the towards the green economy. That's the challenge. And that's why I say, making a long story short, in this fascinating situation with unprecedented challenges that we are having, in fact, innovation and I would argue sustainability are going to be two very, very important concepts for the 21st century. Innovation is the key to productivity. Productivity is what we need to guarantee sustainable growth. It is what we need to guarantee fiscal sustainability, which is a key challenge of our times. It is what we need in the context of the EU convergence of productivity, what we need in the context of the EU to ensure sustainability also of our common currency. So that's a long story, but I think the key elements are here. I think innovation is an absolutely core challenge for everything that we are trying to do, and it's becoming and has become even more important than it was because I would argue of the difficult situation that we found ourselves in the context of that crisis, innovation and sustainability. Second point, the growth strategy of the EU. We call this Europe 2020. I will give you I will repeat just the key concepts which are at the basis of this strategy. The heart of the strategy is around three key priorities. First, smart growth, developing an economy based on knowledge and innovation. Second, sustainable growth, the importance of sustainability, promoting a more resource-efficient, greener and more competitive economy. Third, inclusive growth, fostering high employment economy, delivering economic, social and territorial cohesion, very important for the sustainability of our union and our monetary union particularly. We have for this strategy, and I will just mention them, we have defined 5 goals. So I just enumerate these 5 goals that should guide us in the effort to achieve these 3 priorities that we have given to ourselves. 75% of the population between 20 and 64% should be employed. That's the target that we should aim at. Second, 3% of the EU GDP should be invested in research and development. We didn't manage to do this in the last decade where we have this objective. We have to give, we cannot afford to give up. We have to do better in the next 10 years. Third, the 20% reduction, 20% of renewable energy, 20% reduction of carbon emissions, and 20% of renewables in our energy mix are the climate and energy targets that we have, and they should be met. In fact, interestingly enough, I think this is a fascinating debate that is taking place there in Europe. We are talking within the EU, we will have a communication, we are preparing a communication for the end of May on whether the EU should move unilaterally to the target of 30% reduction of carbon emissions. And in this debate, you know, we have said the motivation that we had in this debate, whether we go from 20 to 30, was the negotiation for climate change, the negotiation for carbon emission reductions in the international context. And we said if the others move towards an agreement, we will reduce from the 20% reduction target that we are having now to 30% reduction. Now, in the discussion that we are having, the main argument is really whether it is not and there are many people who argue that it is, in the interest of the EU to move even unilaterally from a 20% reduction by 2020 to 30% reduction. That means impose more constraints on our own economy, not because of the international negotiations, but because it can be, under conditions that are debated, but it can be a framework that will stimulate investment and innovation within the EU in a more efficient way, and it will make it beneficial for the EU, not just for the international negotiations. So, fourth of the 5 goals that I mentioned, the share of early school leaves should be under 10%, and at least 40% of the population should have a degree or diploma. So that's education, increasing the standards and the output of the education. And finally, fifth goal, we should have a reduction of people at poverty, of risk of poverty, of around 20 million within the EU. That's the concept of the inclusive growth that I mentioned before. Now, there are a lot of initiatives that are in that strategy that I don't have the time to mention here, but I would really invite you to have a look if you have not seen it, because it's at least something that we absolutely know, a vision for the future. And I tend to believe more and more that our complex societies, economies, and in fact the world itself, but that's foreign policy, it's for another forum. But I tend to believe more and more that the complexity of our modern world cannot be managed just by a very efficient and intelligent day-to-day management. It needs a vision. We need to know where, from a public policy point of view, where we need to go, what do we need to reach, what outcome we want. Very briefly, my next point, the current instruments of supporting innovation. In the current situation, we have basically 2 instruments. I just mentioned them without analyze them. Most of you must be familiar with those. The 2 main EU instruments to help innovation for the time being is first the 7th Framework Program for Research and Technological Development, which is the main instrument for the EU to promote research and technological development, as the name indicates, and on which we invest for the period from 2007 to 2013, 50.5 billion euros. And then is the Competitiveness and Innovation Program that is targeting specifically the SMEs. So these are programs that exist. You can find them, and all the details that you need, they are online. The orientations that we are taking for the future in terms of the specific innovation policy, I think there are 3 main ideas that I can mention to you. These are ideas on which we are working. There will be a plan that we will call European Research and Innovation Plan that should be out in a few months. And the orientations there are, as I said, there are several, but if I can mention just 3 very briefly, is first to concentrate our research and innovation policies and effort clearly on the so-called grand challenges, the big challenges facing our society. The short list is climate change, energy security, food security, health, and everything concerning the aging population. These are the big trends of our society where we need a particular level of innovation to respond to those. The second idea driving the current review and the effort to plan for the future is the recognition of a weakness, of an historical weakness of the EU, where we do have a very high-level science and technology basis, but we have a relatively low ability, particularly compared with the US, to transform that into inventions and innovative products and services. So there needs to be there an emphasis of public policy making. And the third point is that innovation, particularly linked to this concept of how much the innovation needs to serve the effort of our society to adapt to the big challenges of the future, has to be based on a wider concept of innovation. It's not only technological, it's not only products, it's not only directly specific physical results. It's also innovation on issues like business models, like management innovation, like design and marketing, and the wide sphere of services. Now, turning to trade, the other big theme, and as I said, the indispensable part of any realistic progress that we can hope to make. Now, trade, we have been talking with Michael and others on trade for the 5 years that I have been here, so I'm not going to pretend to develop everything on trade policy and where we're going, but just again 2-3 key ideas. Yeah, the orientations that we are taking on trade policy, and I think it's very important also for the debate that is taking in this place. Where is the trade policy of the US going? Well, I cannot answer that question, but let me give you the three that I would consider dominant orientations in our effort to define the trade policy of the future. We are, by the way, working also in the idea of presenting an official communication on trade policy, to put this on paper and make it a public policy. First is, of course, delivering on whatever negotiations we have started, or others on which we are starting. We have a number of FTAs, free trade areas negotiations discussed bilaterally. Some of them we hope to ratify them soon. Korea, others are under development. With some we have committed to start. We will not backtrack on any of those commitments. We will do our best to proceed with the current agenda. However, for the future, we will look to point 2 and 3. Point 2 is identifying trade opening initiatives for sectors. If we can have sectoral approaches that can give results, we will look for sectoral agreements if possible. And number 3, we will invest particular effort and our available resources to strengthen the relationship with key partners such as the US and China. Of course, our priority remains the WTO. The EU is profoundly multilateral, and if we work on other forms of agreements is in order to promote free trade globally, and the multilateral approach remains our priority. Now, a few words on the Transatlantic Innovation Action Partnership, and I finish with that. Now, the EU-US Innovation Partnership, it's an initiative that it's in the process of being developed within the Transatlantic Economic Council. The Transatlantic Economic Council, you can read a lot about it, and there are all kind of thinking and ideas, and a lot of people are contributing to it. Basically, it's the product of an acceptance of one profound reality, and the profound reality is that the future of free trade is not just the WTO non-tariff barriers or the tariff liberalization. In the transatlantic economy, we are beyond that. The future of free trade has to do with our ability not to create new obstacles, to have standards and rules and regulations that make sense, and more importantly, to deal with the challenges of the future. If we talk about innovation, we talk about new technologies in a number of important sectors. Nanotechnology, to take an example, that can be the most important of all for the next couple of decades. in all these areas, we need to produce new rules, new regulations, new safety rules for consumers and others. And the future of free trade has to do profoundly with our ability to create a coherent environment, a coherent way of regulating, of addressing the technical challenges, but also the technological and innovation challenges of the future. So that's what the tech is about, and the Transatlantic Innovation Partnership starts from a very simple idea, and this very simple idea is that we need to invest all our possible resources on really the main technological and innovation challenges of the future, being the specific products like electric cars, as I said, nanotechnology, or bio-based products, or biotechnology that can be important for the future, and develop for those technologies a framework, a transatlantic framework that will facilitate and encourage both innovation, cooperation, trade, and investment. And that's the idea on which the Transatlantic Innovation Partnership will work. I'm probably a little bit beyond my 15 minutes already. So just to finish, let me repeat that. I believe very much the essence, not the technicalities, are the key idea and the political will to drive the evolutions in the right direction. Innovation is a fundamental challenge for our society on its own. I'm talking about the US and the EU, and for our cooperation. We have here an area where we have a fundamental interest to deepen our partnership. We have a fundamental interest to create a space, a transatlantic space, where innovation is encouraged, where we don't have artificial barriers to what is really the decisive aspect of our future capability to address the challenges of our times, where we what we really have at stake, and I think it's not very different from between the EU and the US, is as Van Rompuy said and Barroso repeated. They both put on the table a very simple and so powerful idea that really the future of our way of being, of our societies as we know or as we know them, our ability to preserve our values within our own societies, depend of our ability to sustain a level of growth that is sufficient for that. So economic growth is not something technical. It has something to do, it's a fundamental challenge for maintaining everything that we believe in. And to maintain growth, we need competitiveness. And competitiveness in the future can only be based on an accelerated effort of innovation. And I think it's as simple and as fundamental as that. That's the issue that we are dealing with. So it's very important to see the specifics and the details and the technical aspects of what we need to do. But I think we need to keep the view, the size of the challenge that we are talking about, and the fundamental issues that we are called as organized society to address. Thank you for your attention.